everybody, Ellie here for WhoCulture, and I'm back. Now some of you might not have even noticed that I was away, but for those of you who don't know, Sean and I just spent the past week out in Las Vegas at the Star Trek convention, and I can hear you saying, Ellie, this is a Doctor Who channel, why are you talking about Star Trek? But I must say, the number of people who approached me at that convention with compliments and love for WhoCulture as well as Trek culture was actually really surprising to me, and it was so lovely to meet everybody. And yeah, it just blew my mind how many people watched WhoCulture at this convention. So if you are one of those people who came and said hello to either myself or Sean, thank you so much for your continued support to both our channels, and it was very, very lovely to meet you. And of course, I didn't come back from Vegas empty-handed. Oh no, I came back with COVID. But it's all good. I've had worse bouts of it. We'll all be fine by next week. And of course, the world of Doctor Who did continue to turn while we were away, and there are more things to discuss. So the things I am going to discuss here are from the latest edition of SFX magazine. As usual, I'm only going to cover a fraction of what was discussed in that latest edition. And if you want the full details, then please do go and get your hands on a copy of the full magazine, and there is a link down below for you as well. So let's get straight into it. So the thing I want to focus on revolves around the whole idea of Sutekh clinging to the Tardis, which Russell T Davies in this interview shed a little bit more light on. So first of all, he reiterated the fact that Sutekh has been on board the Tardis since 1975's Pyramids of Mars, which we kind of already knew. I guess it wasn't explicitly stated in Empire of Death, but that was the assumption, and I don't think that's really news to any of us. He basically went straight into that time corridor at the end of that serial to the TARDIS in the vortex, which was very sneaky of him, let's be honest. Clever, but sneaky. But the thing is, when you think about it, that is still quite a weird thing. We didn't really talk about it in great detail in our coverage of the finale, but imagine all the places that the TARDIS has been and all the situations that the TARDIS has been in. You know, think about the Oval Office. Sutekh was there. Getting shot at in a gang war. Sutekh was there. I mean, being shaken by those weeping angels in Blink. And then Capaldi was sitting on the TARDIS in Listen. I mean, was he sitting on top of Sutekh? And then again, we have later on when the 13th Doctor is saying goodbye to Yaz and they're sat on top of the TARDIS eating ice cream. Were they just sitting on top of Sutekh? Or what about when 11 was holding onto Amy's leg as she was like floating outside of the TARDIS? Was Sutekh just thinking, what is going on here? The more you think about it, the more weird it is. But now, with this interview, Russell has revealed the exact moment that Sutekh woke up and actually became active, so to speak. Basically, he's explained that Sutekh was dormant for all of those years since 1975, while he was basically working on his master plan, the whole Susan Triad plan. And presumably most of that time he spent thinking of the perfect pun and finding a graphics guy. 'Cause still want to know how he sorted those graphics. And then Russell reveals that the moment that Sutekh woke up is actually at the end of the Star Beast when Donna spilled the coffee on the TARDIS console. So basically, Donna is responsible for the God of Death awakening and all of the carnage that happens in the season 1 finale. And I bet you she slept all the way through it because, let's be honest, that's what Donna does. She misses everything. So here is what Russell had to say about this situation. I think it needed the explosion that was big enough at the end of the Star Beast, when the TARDIS kind of goes mad and blows up. That's kind of what woke Sutekh up. Now, if you think about it, this does track back, because if you remember, the first time that we heard that weird kind of groaning noise come from the TARDIS was right at the start of Wild Blue Yonder, when the Doctor and Donna landed on the ship at the edge of the universe after the whole coffee situation had happened. Now, since that sound was then later revealed to be Sutekh, it does make sense for him to kind of have become active around that same time that we heard the groaning noise for the first time. Okay, fair enough, that does make sense. And I don't want to be a negative Nelly about all of Russell's explanations, which I seem to be doing quite a lot of lately, but to me this just makes the whole situation feel needlessly complicated and more weird. I think mainly I just don't understand why Sutekh had to have been clinging onto the TARDIS since 1975. When you then look back at the history of the show and the history of the TARDIS, it just makes it feel a bit strange. You know, then imagining the fact that Sutekh was clinging to the top of the TARDIS constantly, when you look back at other situations, that just kind of makes the situation feel a bit more weird now. I mean, like what I just said about Capaldi sitting on top of the TARDIS, and then does that mean that he's sitting on top of Sutekh? Or similarly with 13 and Yaz? And why did other things like House infecting the TARDIS in The Doctor's Wife, why did that not reveal Sutekh? I think also it kind of creates continuity issues as well, slightly. I mean, basically here Russell's saying that Sutekh needed an explosion that was big enough to awaken him, and the one at the end of the Star Beast, once again, thank you Donna, is the one to do that, but there's already been massive explosions inside the TARDIS since then. Arguably worse than the one we saw in the Star Beast. I mean, think about the Pandorica opens and the Big Bang. The TARDIS literally exploded into pieces and destroyed the universe, and you're telling me that that wasn't enough to wake up Sutekh? Or what about when 10 regenerated into 11 and literally the entire console room exploded and then 11 wasn't even allowed inside for like an entire episode? To me, those explosions seem far bigger and greater and more likely to wake up Sutekh than Donna spilling coffee on the TARDIS. No? Am I wrong here? The other thing we have to keep imagining also is the Susan Triad variants popping up everywhere that the Doctor has visited since 1975, which I will admit is less problematic than the explosion thing, but it still does feel just a little bit messy. This is the issue when you rewrite the history of the show, essentially, when you introduce something that alters everything you've known up until this point. Obviously, you can't go back and change things, so that needs to be something you're considering. Because people like us, the fans, who think about these things are now going to be thinking about the history of the show in a very different way and thinking, that doesn't make sense now. Obviously, in the real world, that's because these things didn't technically happen until this moment where it was said it happened. But when you look at it inside the show itself, you've overcomplicated things now because you can't go back and change it. The thing is, don't get me wrong, I actually do like the idea of Sutekh clinging to the TARDIS, of him kind of biding his time, formulating this plan. It's really sinister, it's really evil, and it's the perfect plot for the God of Death. Also, when you think about the visual of him playing with the TARDIS like it's some sort of toy in that time window scene, I mean, that's brilliant. When he kind of spins it around, you really get this idea that he is this god, and the TARDIS and the Doctor, they're just playthings to him. I really do like that idea. But it just feels like it would be much more logical and cleaner to have said that he jumped onto the TARDIS in Wild Blue Yonder when the TARDIS was literally at the edge of the universe. I mean, it's perfectly set up in that episode to make sense. The Doctor literally says the walls are thin out there, so that would make it much easier for Sutekh to have jumped from the time corridor to the TARDIS while they were at the edge of the universe. Then when you think about it further, that is the first episode we are introduced to a Susan Triad character with Mrs. Merridew, and it's also the first time we hear that groaning noise of the TARDIS. So when you put all of that together, that makes so much more sense than rewriting the entire history of the show since 1975. Then you still would have had Sutekh clinging to the TARDIS and observing the Doctor, and being able to execute his plan. I mean, yes, okay, granted, Russell would have then needed to find a workaround for the fact that the 15th Doctor obviously hadn't visited that many places, as opposed to all the places the TARDIS had landed since 1975, but I feel like that's something that would have been easier to fix or easier to explain, rather than jumping through all of these hoops to kind of justify the fact that Sutekh was there since 1975. Am I making any sense? I also think this would have given maybe a more personal connection and rivalry between Sutekh and the 15th Doctor, which I think probably would have strengthened the finale as a whole. I mean, this was season 1, after all, so if you make Sutekh feel more like a 15th Doctor villain, I think that would have really helped to kind of create this kind of bond between the Doctor and their villain. I think what's funny as well is, after The Legend of Ruby Sunday aired, we all thought that Wild Blue Yonder was going to be the moment that Sutekh arrived. That's the conclusion we all came to. It just seemed so obvious, you know, with the groaning noises, with Mrs. Merridew. I mean, we did a whole ending explained video where that was our main theory. So it's just interesting to think that Russell set it up perfectly for that to be the answer, and then what, didn't think of it? Didn't want to do that? I feel like there's a theme here with Russell overcomplicating things for the sake of it. What I want is just a good story. It doesn't need to be overcomplicated. It's like all these mysteries that were set up for Ruby's mother reveal, and then it actually ended up falling flat when if you just told a decent story without trying to make it too complicated, trying to trick people, and focusing primarily on the story itself, I wouldn't have minded if it had been a predictable answer. Does that make sense? And I think the same thing kind of happens here. You're overcomplicating the explanations, where I wouldn't have been disappointed if the answer that I had come to, the conclusion I had come to, was the one we ended up getting, if it was a really satisfying payoff. Really, if I were Russell, I would have chosen the path of least resistance, the path that doesn't interfere with the history of the show too much, and actually seems like the most logical answer. All of that being said though, I do kind of think it's slightly funny to think that Donna basically gave Sutekh his morning coffee. She gave him the coffee and he woke up, because we all need coffee to wake up sometimes, you know? I certainly need some coffee to sort out this jet lag. I don't know, let me know what you think in the comments down below. Am I overreacting here? Are you happy with the explanations we've been given here? Or do you think, like we do, that Wild Blue Yonder made more sense to be the explanation for Sutekh, and it wouldn't have overcomplicated things? As I said at the beginning, this is just a fraction of what has been revealed in the latest edition of SFX magazine, so do go and get your hands on a copy of that magazine for all of the details. And once again, thank you to Darren over at SFX for continually supporting our channel, and I've run out of things to say.